Welcome to Oyate Today. Oyate in Lakota means people. Brought to you by Native Sun News Today.
My name is Tim Giago. I'm the producer of Oyate Today show. And we had our former co-host had come down with an illness, and she will not be hosting the show from now on. And so I have Richie Richards, who will be doing the show from now on. And Richie works at Native Sun News Today as a correspondent. And ironically, Richie's dad and I went to school together at Holy Rosary Indian Mission many years ago, and we served together in Korea back in 1952 and 1953. Anyhow, our guest today is Lionel Bordeaux, who's the president of the Sinte Gleska University. And I met Lionel about 40 years ago when I was at Pine Ridge, and he came to give an address to the Oglala Sioux tribe at the inauguration of Elijah Whirlwind Horse. And I was very impressed that he gave most of his speech in the Lakota language. But more than that, I think I was more impressed with his ideas on what to do about Indian education and how knowledge is power. And so with that, I'll turn it over to our host here, Richie Richards.
Hi, viewers. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Dr. Bordeaux, for coming on Oyate today and bringing your knowledge and your expertise and your basically what you've done in your profession and sharing that with our viewers. So I'm very appreciative of that. One of the things that we wanted to do, and at Dr. Bordeaux's request, was to do a traditional Lakota prayer and follow appropriate protocol. So, Dr. Bordeaux, if you could give us a prayer, please.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. My prayer will, I'll thank the Great Spirit for a beautiful occasion, and thank all of you and KEVN and KOTA and whomever else for developing this type of program. It's badly needed. Lakotas need to tell our story, who we are, and I want to thank Ancestry for the spirituality and guidance and protection and strength that they give us. And I want to say a prayer for what's happening in Houston and in Texas, and remembering what happened here in Rapid City in 1972. And these are tragedies, yet on the other hand, they are acts of nature, and it's hard to understand what happens, but I know people strengthen their faith and they work closer together, and that's the hope of this program and the education that I serve in. And pray for those who are at nursing homes, who are in hospitals, who lost loved ones, those who are in prisons, those who are in the military, and we pray that the Spirit will continue to look after us. Rapid City in 1972. Now the Chala Houston Ektaina Asia. Wakip Hap Hena Wash Agwich Hamana. We chose on in a walk, a walk like a wonshilla, which I could walk on her. Nice to tell Kashkan Kamnishakichi to Obhamnish. In Asia, Havichak down at Hako. Tokata Kit Hako, Jawichu Hockey, and Asia won't spill a Yuchlogia. Shagia Unkte, Jungesa Honi Chapelo, Omitako Yase, Piloya Pello. Thank you.
I hope. Thank you for that prayer, Dr. Bordeaux. It's my understanding that in February of 2018, you'll be celebrating your 45th year as president of Sinte Gleska University. But before that, could you kind of give us some background and some information about your life up until that point, what led to that, possibly where you went to school as a child through your high school and collegiate years?
I was born and raised in a log house down along the river, northeast of the town of White River. I was raised by grandparents, Alec Bordeaux Jr. and Mary Jordan Bordeaux. me and my brother Linwood. My mother went to work in Sioux Falls so that she could help us during the World War II. I never saw my father. My brother and I enjoyed the everyday life of riding horseback. Our home didn't have, nothing of. We walked a mile to get a pail of water and chopped wood, but it was a very enjoyable childhood that we had, and I thank my grandparents and the whole village for raising us. And they taught me the language, which later became very important when I was asked to become the president at St. Aglaska University. But my initial schooling started at a BIA day school, Horse Creek Day School, located near the town of White River. I went briefly to public school in White River, then transferred to Winter, back to White River to graduate, and then I went to, with my aunt and uncle, Harvey Little Thunder and Gertrude, to Lincoln, Nebraska, where I went to school in my 9th and 10th grade. Then I transferred back and graduated at St. Francis Indian Mission, my 11th and 12th. Because I could speak Lakota, the priests wanted me to be a Jesuit. They wanted their first Lakota speaking Jesuit priest, but I turned them down, and so they shook my hand and said, maybe the military. And I walked the streets of White River for 2 years, met my wife, and her mother was a school teacher, and they thought, maybe I should have been in college, because mother was at my graduation, said I gave a good valedictorian speech. There was 10 of us of our graduating class, and eventually I found myself in Black Hills State University. Very lonesome. I didn't like it. Every night that I would think of home, an owl would appear and would hoot outside my window. And I would think of my grandparents when we lived in the house, and my grandfather would be patting his chest and singing a song, and you could hear the owls in the background. And it always take me back home. Thanksgiving I quit. Told my grandma, and we had just pulled my grandpa out of a dam. And she said, if your grandpa were alive, he'd want you in college. And I said, I know it. I promised my grandma I'd graduate college, and I did. And then I couldn't find work at home. I caught a ride, and I went to the Hickory Apache Reservation in Dulce, New Mexico, and the BIA hired me. And I was in charge of dormitories there, working with Apache and Navajo students. I was eventually one of 5 selected through the Bureau to be trained for a future managerial position. That took me back to Washington, D.C. I went to George Washington University for 1 year, and then I come to Pine Ridge. I went on to do my master's, and I went on to University of Minnesota, and I finished all my coursework for a PhD in educational administration. And I was getting ready to graduate. I passed my preliminary orals, and one day a Lakota gentleman by the name of Stanley Redbird Sr. come to see me. He said he had a message, and I didn't know him, and I couldn't imagine what the message was. But I was honored, but I was also stunned when he come to see me, and he told me about this tribal college, St. Aglaska University, that he started at home to strengthen the Giago Oyate, and that he had developed this institution with the help of tribal medicine men. And for recruitment, he was looking for somebody who knew the language, but who also had academic credentials. And he asked 2 medicine men, Frank Pickett Penn and Robert Steed, to hold ceremonies to see if they could come up with a name that he was to approach and tell that that person would be the next president at St. Aglaska University. Lo and behold, Stanley come and said my name come from the spirit world, and that I was to resign the 10 years that I had with the Bureau. I was to withdraw from the University of Minnesota. I was not to graduate, and I was to follow him home. My wife agreed, and that's what I did. I was inaugurated by medicine men, and I had to go through the ceremony again to reaffirm that I was willing to do what I did.
Dr. Bordeaux, you had mentioned the Lakota language and Lakota traditions playing a role, and it was one of the first things that you had mentioned when you talked about your educational background. So when we return with Oyate today, after a word from our sponsors, maybe you can touch a little bit more on the role that Lakota language, Lakota traditions plays in contemporary educational systems. So we'll be back after a word from our sponsors.
Around here, you work hard and you play hard. In the Black Hills, on the prairie, and in towns and cities all across this great land. And when you need help, your neighbors are there too, like Regional Health. Regional Health, helping patients and communities live well.
Our school has great students and dedicated teachers, but we need our community volunteers to help us to provide a broader view of the many ways a good education can point to a bright future.
Did someone say volunteer? Our team at Black Hills is here to help. In fact, we sponsor events and projects, and our employees volunteer for organizations throughout the Black Hills, including partnering with schools to help students learn more about life outside the classroom. Extracurricular, extra fun.
We are not so different, you and I. We may be from different places, but the sun that greets me in the morning, the sun that warms the hills, is the same sun that greets you. We are all connected. We are all family. Mitakuye Oyasi.
You can't predict life's ups and downs. You just give it all you've got to stay on top. But it's easier with a partner like Security First Bank. Since 1898, we've been riding with you through the country's biggest ups and downs. And this is where we'll stay. Security First Bank, a relationship you can count on. Member FDIC.
Welcome back to Oyate Today with our guest, Dr. Lionel Bordeaux of Sinte Gleshka University on the Rosebud Indian Reservation. Before the break, we were discussing the role that Lakota traditions, Lakota language played in your education and your upbringing. And so what I wanted to ask about was you had mentioned Stanley Redbird and the founding of SGU. In your terms, why was it important for Stanley Redbird to found Sinte Gleshka University?
Stanley was a brilliant visionary who grew up with the culture. It was an era of self-determination as uttered by President Nixon back in 1971. And Stanley took a look at what was happening on the reservation. He saw deplorable statistics, low educational achievement, no employment, health issues, a lot of our young ones being incarcerated, and Stanley felt that there needed to be some kind of a vehicle to address all this. And he wanted to do it through education and spirituality and the culture and the economics of what possibly could be done with tribal assets. So he created the university, much like what the Dene people, the Navajo Nation, had also started a tribal college. And they both saw the dropout situation, students leaving the reservation and returning home. And Stanley thought maybe if we could develop a tribal college at home where people could stay with the family, and that there'd be better success of having more graduates. Additionally, Stanley wanted to see an institution of advocacy. He felt that in order to strengthen the culture through education, You had to redefine and restructure education, and you had to own education through your own accreditation model. And Stanley didn't see this happening. He felt this education system come from afar. Tribal people had their own educational system where the whole village was the teacher. They had a chronological method of training young ones, and Stanley didn't see this. He felt the educational system was too compartmentalized, and it was set up in a structure, and it was devoid of history, it was devoid of a cultural foundation, and he didn't wish this upon his people. And as such, in wanting to strengthen the institution, strengthen the Oyate, the tribal people, he felt that he needed to return to the culture and the foundation, and only through education in our own accreditation and ownership could he address this. And so he did. And then he wanted somebody who had the credentials, principally being able to speak the language, because he wanted to be, it was through the language that he wanted to be able to secure the will and support of the people to get behind these mandates and to develop a whole new systematic change of everything that the federal government really literally was forcing down tribal nations' throats. And Stanley and his friends and the Tribal Council of Webster Tuhawk in 1970 and 71 was able to develop a resolution that addressed developing Sinteglishka University. And that's how the institution first come about.
So based on what you're saying then, the role of Lakota language, or an indigenous language in any community, basically played a significant role in not only the founding of SGU, but in Indian education and higher education for American Indians and in general. And so when we talk on those terms, and we mention the presence in the Black Hills of higher education for American Indians, where is that at currently, and what would you like to see happen with expanding off-reservation Indian education, specifically for the Black Hills?
The spirituality comes into play, particularly when you utilize the language, because with the language comes everything that deals with tribal livelihood. And where the Black Hills, the Chesapa comes into the picture. The Chesapa is one of the most sacred areas and life measures that we have. And so it's necessary that we have a presence in the Black Hills. And certainly you have the constitutional right in the Treaty of 1868 that the Indian people kept the Black Hills for themselves. Unfortunately, things went wrong and the treaty was violated, and Lakota people were pretty much forced out of the Black Hills. I know Supreme Court has even rendered that same decision, yet on the other hand, they said that there couldn't have been a more worst case that ever appeared on their docket. And to this day, tribal people have refused any of that money. The Black Hills, in large ways, is really the glue that bonds and holds tribal people together. And there needs to be an educational presence. And I remember the late Stanley Crooks calling all the tribal chairmen to his office, and he told them that there needed to be a presence in the area of culture, education, economics, and veterans. And I remember years ago when Senator Bradley and them were talking about returning Black Hills, or at least portions of it, back to tribal people. And they were in town, or he was in town, and the next day I was sitting there with a good friend of mine, Dugan LeBeau, and Dugan wanted to do a Indian cowboy report. And we went into this lounge that looked empty. Unfortunately, there were some people in there who come over, and one guy said, "I suppose they're here to take back the Black Hills." And, you know, I shook my hand and I said, "Let's talk about it." And he got a little confrontational, but eventually things settled down, and I couldn't believe what this young man said. He said the majority of residents in the Black Hills who are Christian people who would like to right this wrong. And if there was a representative Indian body that they could talk with, they'd be willing to sign a piece of paper acknowledging the fact that this land legally still belonged to tribal people. And furthermore, they'd be willing to pay rent or annual lease for their businesses, their homes, their schools, their cemeteries that are here. And the next day I went to see Bishop Charles Chaput and told him the same thing. And he told me, he said, "I've been waiting for somebody to come and mention this because," he said, "my parishioners are telling me the same thing." So he said, you know, he could use church money to hold town halls and bring all stakeholders together to talk about this.
Wow, that's some really interesting insight. I appreciate you sharing that with our viewers today. We're going to go to break now and have a word from our sponsors. Dr. Bordeaux, when we return, I'd like to learn a little bit more about the current state of SGU, some of the challenges, and what you're dealing with as president of Sinte Gleshka University. So we'll be back right after this break.
Closed captioning for Oyate Today, brought to you by West River Ear, Nose, and Throat.
Clark had joint replacement surgery 6 months ago. To his grandson, he is still the MVP. Black Hills Surgical Hospital, bringing more life to your years.
Native Son News has been voted the best weekly newspaper in its class for 2015 by the South Dakota and North Dakota Newspaper Associations. You can find a copy of the Native Son News at many businesses and vending machines in Rapid City and the surrounding area, and on all 9 reservations. We publish every Wednesday, so advertisers and subscribers can reach our diverse readership by calling 605-721-1266. The Native Son News covers the other side of the story.
The aftermath from the recent hurricanes and tropical storms have devastated thousands of communities. You can help the millions of Americans who are affected by these storms. Show your support today. Go to our app or blackhillsfox.com/hurricane relief and make a donation today.
Welcome back to Oyate Today, and our special guest, Dr. Lionel Bordeaux of Sinte Gleshka University. Before the break, Dr. Bordeaux, we had discussed some of the history of Indian education, the role that Lakota language and Lakota traditions played in the development of these early years of higher education for American Indians. But I wanted to talk about and touch and at least relate some of the information that you have about where we are currently with Indian education, higher education, especially as your role as president of Sinte Gleshka in Rosebud, one of the poorest counties in the United States. And what are some of those challenges as president that you come across and that you face?
Poverty is a big one, and I really have to hand it to our students. They, for the most part, lack adequate financial aid and scholarships, and they come far distances in a bus, and we're now able to provide a noon meal to them, and we're working on an evening meal. But the poverty situation has to be addressed in partnership with tribal government as well as other institutions of higher learning in the business world. Because it sets an example and it teaches our young ones about financial management and about entrepreneurship. And we have 1 million acres of land, and there's no reason why we have to be amongst the poorest counties in the United States. So through the institution, our aim is to continue to work to achieve some type of a balance, at least down the line, in utilizing our land and training in those areas where land use planning in agriculture and farming can be of benefit to ourselves. And the institution has this as our role. But in order to do that with any adequacy and success, we have to own education. As the poorest county in the United States, roughly, you would think that our accreditation and certification agencies and peer in Chicago would rush to assist us. But when we opted to go from an AA degree in business to a baccalaureate, they held us up for 10 years and said that we were not financially ready to sustain a baccalaureate degree. And that's an example as to why we need to have our own accreditation through our own tribal laws and spirituality. But there are just so many other things we need to hold. Right here in the hills, we need a spiritual center. We need a veteran center. We need an educational center. We need an economic developing center. We need a museum. We need an archives. We need a tourist center. And likewise in Washington, we need an agency. We need a national agenda for tribal self-determination. We need a tribal martial law. And we need to have embassies and ambassadors both in Washington, in the state, and we need to bring everybody together to work in partnership so that we can address, we have tremendously smart young people, and yet, we have terrible statistics. And my hope here is that this message gets out to everybody and we can bring everybody together and we can have these kind of discussions for the future.
Dr. Bordeaux, I really do appreciate your insight. I definitely appreciate you coming here today on the Oyate Today. One of the things, well, first of all, I just wanted to close our show. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our producers, Tim and Jackie Giago. Thank you, Dr. Bordeaux, for being on the show. And thank you for making Oyate Today a part of your night. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
You've been watching Oyate Today, brought to you by Native Sun News Today.